we'll see if Danny's up for an impromptu collab. Danny, I was also had you up on our stream, and I saw you talking about this too, which is why I could answer so quickly.
Oh, really? Awesome. Oh, this is fantastic. But yeah, what are your first thoughts on this, Balint? I've been eager to actually get the perspective of a real life geneticist here.
Yeah, so I knew about Colossal Biotech for a while now because they were doing like the thylacine and they're doing the dodo bird, and I saw this cover on Time magazine pop up, and I thought that was I didn't realize that it was that same company. I was very surprised. I'm like, oh, this sounds really interesting. And like the cover makes it look like a really, really big deal, right? Because all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, we brought back this animal that hasn't been around for 10,000 years. But as soon as we break it down, it's 14 genes with 20 mutations, and 5 of those genes are already part of the gray wolf.
Right.
So it's a very, very small percentage of anything that's actually being done, which was frustrating to me because I feel like it's far too propped up and like sensationalized. It doesn't really sound like it's what they make it out to be. And we were just showing like the number of Google articles that were demonstrating like de-extinction, like all these kinds of news stories. And we don't even have a paper. There is no paper to look at.
Right. I was really surprised by that too. That we don't have any publications yet. Like, has this even been peer reviewed? Do they actually have the genome of the direwolf? Because are you aware, Balint, that the direwolf might not actually be a wolf at all? It might not be close to wolves.
Yeah, we were chatting about that a little bit too earlier on, and so there's a claim. There's no data, but y'all can decide from the company that says 99.5% of the direwolf's genome and the gray wolf's genome is identical.
Right, and which is interesting because that directly contradicts some other findings from other teams where they're saying that these are separate lineages, that they've been separate for about 6 million years. They've been evolving in different directions. They're totally different genera. And so if they actually have a full genome of a direwolf, they should be able to demonstrate, that would be a great publication too, like easily Nature or Science paper saying, hey, we've got the full genome. Allegedly. It is, same lineage as wolves or something, but it doesn't seem like they've done that.
The paper that we were looking at, like the one that you mentioned too, is this one here. This is the one, so structural variation during dog domestication, where they have the gray wolf genome. And there they establish an estimate of the number of genes that exist in the gray wolf. So that isn't fully known as well. So like that range is 20 to 25,000 genes, right? And so and the way they would do that, right, is you look at the gene body, you look at where the genes start, where the genes end, how that system works, and then like have an estimate that this makes one genetic unit. And the issue is, that it's not, that definition isn't standard, and that requires a lot of time and going in manually to either annotate the genome of a dog and then hope that it matches in a wolf, and or go in and annotate the wolf and then like further sub-annotate the new one. And I just don't think that that's happened.
Interesting. Okay.
And by annotate, I mean you go in manually and you look at this like DNA sequence in your Excel sheet and you manually identify that this is a start site and this is an end site, and then that you try to match up like based on this structure, this gene is most similar to X in another animal. Because, we can't test it.
Sure.
We can't test it.
Right. It's discouraging to hear. Because deep down, I really want this to be totally legitimate, and it'd be really cool to be able to bring back these animals from extinction. But I don't know. I was talking with my chat earlier about how there's so much hype around this. It's on the cover of Time magazine, or I guess it will be at the beginning of May. They've released all these really slick videos today, just in the last few hours. They're making a lot of extraordinary claims here, and I don't know how many of these are actually fully backed up by what they're doing. For one thing, just calling it a direwolf is go ahead.
Did you talk about the woolly mammoth mouse paper from a few weeks ago?
Not really. No. We just glanced at it really briefly, but I think some chatters were asking about it, and I encouraged them to go talk to you about it.
Well, so that's the same company.
You would know a lot more about this than I would.
Well, so that it is
Colossal,
that's the same company, and they released a paper, but it's a preprint, so it's not peer reviewed. And if you look in the methods, it's nowhere else in in the paper, it's in the supplementary methods, that they only actually got 3 of the 17 mice to have all the genetic information in that they wanted. And the others there was all these off-target effects. There were all these extra mutations in there that they did not account for, or it didn't actually pull in all the mutations that they wanted. So it's like, it's not even their own claims on their press release is not backed up by their own paper. And you would only know that if you went into the methods.
Shoot. Did that get reported on? Like, are there any science journalist reporters who have called that out?
No. So it was one of Lita's first things. Lita read the paper and she just like hit the roof on the method. She's like, this is like statistically insignificant compared to what you're actually being able to do. And so if it's that, that's why to me, right, it was immediately like, well, wait a minute. If this company is the same one that's, quote, de-extinctifying this one, well, then is it as trustworthy, right?
That's, I don't know. As somebody, you know, like yourself who does science outreach more or less full time, it gives me pause. Like I'm part of me is afraid that, I don't know, this might be misinforming the public and it might harm public trust in science. If these are the things that are making headlines and then they don't pan out, that might be really bad for science at large. It might be bad for science communicators like us. And that, you know, people are going to start to mistrust what they're reading about in the media about science even more than they already do.
100%. And you pointed out very importantly on your stream, if you bring them back, let's suspend the disbelief for a second. Where do you release them? What are the government regulations to protect them? Do they receive the same levels of protection? Because is it really this, like, the same species, or is it something new? Like, what's the end game here? Like, yeah, it's like tech development is great, but what's the next basic step for the welfare and the bioethics behind these animals?
Right. Yeah. But even before we get to that, I mean, I'm really stuck on the definition of direwolf here. Like, there isn't like a strong consensus, as I understand it, on how similar direwolves are to gray wolves. Are they even members of the same genus, or are they not? How recently did they share a common ancestor? And like, I feel like that's something you need to tackle before you can go about, you know, recreating them through cloning technology like this.
I guess it's similar to, like, with their, you know, split. One paper says it thinks it's 6 million years difference.
Yeah.
The technique almost seems to me like what we do in fruit flies, where if you're trying to study a human disease, you can take a human mutant form of a gene, and if there's an equivalent in the fly, you can put it in.
Yeah.
And that's almost, it seems more like the numerical similarities that they've done here, right? Based on the small number of genes. And then I wouldn't call that fly a human. Even if you do put a couple of genes in, right? That's not a fruit fly thing, or like a human thing. So yeah, where is the break point of it? Of where it's, you know, like you said, like, where is the separation between these two animals, or where was it? How much of it is similar enough? And just to give you the numbers, so if you put the gray wolf genome into the sequencer, and doing a little bit of the maths here, the base pairs, so the A, T, C's, and G's, there's 2.4 billion with a B base pairs that's published for the gray wolf. And if we believe that the CEO, who said it's 99.5% similar, I mean, Danny, my maths aren't great, but that's still a fair number of base pairs that are different.
For sure.
And that is not accounted for by the 14 genes.
I mean, it might be, depending on how you count it, 50% of that could be held in common between a gray wolf and a banana.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, 100%. And so it's like that number of 99 seems really, really close until we start breaking down, like you're saying, well, like the banana similarity, because there's housekeeping genes and so on and so forth. And that, you know, there's that much of a similarity between us and bonobos.
Not bananas, but bonobos. Yeah. It's pygmy chimpanzees, as we used to call them. Yeah. Don't want to confuse anybody in chat. But so like we and chimps and bonobos, we share a common ancestor about 3 million years ago, I think. Or maybe it's 6 million. I forget. It's probably 6 million. But yeah, that's, you know, there have been a lot of changes that can take place during that time. And there have been a lot of changes. But we're still 97, 98, 99, well, depending on how you count it, we're still really, really similar to them. Is that the same kind of, same ballpark of differences between a dire wolf and a gray wolf, you think?
I mean, based on my understanding with these animals, there's even more of a difference than those. Like, I think it's a wider spread, because it's not how the lineages have spread out seems to be even further back in time. And I think the domestication process probably influenced those changes. in the wolf lineage more. Just again, because you're selecting for behavioral changes with domestication. And so it's probably undergoing a lot of genetic changes for that, where it's like you're leading to changes in behavior for these animals.
Between the dire wolf and the gray wolf, you mean?
Yeah. And then leading to modern day dogs as well, which is how we're inferring the gene function here. It leaves me a little less than impressed.
Which is disappointing, because like we all want really exciting science news that pans out. Like, I want to have cool things that I can point to get people excited about science, and they're not. It doesn't seem like they're really delivering on that, and it's not ideal.
I've been frustrated today because I was getting Discord messages and tweets and Blue Sky messages and even other people's Discords like, "Hey, Clint, did you see this? Isn't this cool? Like, we brought back this animal." It's like, oh god, it's really like, it's cool if you think about you've taken a gene that hasn't been around for 10,000 years and you've put it into an animal and now it's alive. So that gene is now is alive, and that is cool. But you did not de-extinctify a dire wolf. And even the white, there's one article saying the white coat is just because of Game of Thrones.
Oh, really?
Like not even about, like, there's nothing to back up that the white coat is actually due to the animal. But it's just like,
we don't actually know the coat color for dire wolves. Like, we don't know what colors they were back in the Pleistocene. You'll see different reconstructions from different paleo artists with lots of different colors. We don't know what it is, so like giving it a stark white coat like that, it's a cosmetic choice. Is that a Game of Thrones thing? I never watched it.
I haven't seen it either, but there are some of these news articles that have come out have also signified that I guess they've gotten word from the CEO Shapiro that was the reason why they made it. And I know the wolf that was announced today, the female, Khaleesi, is named after one of the characters in the show.
Right, okay. As a paleontologist, this is kind of a side note, but I'm also just a little bit perturbed. Maybe this is just me being an old man yelling at clouds. But, that it seems like a lot of folks aren't aware that dire wolves are a real animal during the Pleistocene. Like, they're the most common large mammal from La Brea. We've got literally thousands of them from La Brea, and that's how I knew about dire wolves. I had no idea that they were also in, like, fictional media, and a lot of people assume that they're just, like, a fantasy creature and they're made up. Like, that kind of blows my mind and kind of makes me a little bit sad. Like, we need to do a better job as paleontologists of communicating these ideas to the public and getting them excited about all these really neat animals. If you can't get people excited about, like, a big carnivorous, animal from the dog family that preyed on bison and camels and ground sloths and maybe mammoths, then, like, I don't know. It seems like such a low-hanging fruit, and so many people don't even realize that they're real. We need to do a better job as paleontologists, is what I'm saying.
I don't think that's just a paleontology issue. I think it's like the naming system is sometimes taken out and like repurposed by different media sources. So it's like, y'all know what your animal is, and it's just this change that's instituted because it's like thought of to be cool in the popular source. Like you've taught us, right? With like Velociraptor isn't actually Velociraptor, right? It's a Utah Raptor, which doesn't look like Utah Raptor.
It's Deinonychus,
Even better, right? It's Deinonychus on it.
I don't know. I was hoping, Balint, we could also get you to talk about the differences between this direwolf colossal thing and then the Pyrenean ibex, which actually was briefly brought back from extinction. You're familiar with this, right?
Yeah. It's can't remember who
Walk
was
us through
it.
those and let's compare them. Yeah.
Who was it that brought back? Let me bring who brought back the Pyrenean ibex. Can't remember. Was it a school that brought them back, or was it a company? Let me just double check on that.
I want to say it was a research lab, but I only have the vaguest recollection about that.
Yeah, I think it was a lab as well, which is why we think that they actually brought them back. Let me see here. Just because I want to make sure I'm getting it right for the party people here.
Trying to set a good example here. Make sure our information is legit.
Yeah, so it's a 2009 paper. Let me grab that for us and see if it's open access. Oh, it is. Look at that.
Nice.
You would hope from 2009 it would be open access. But there we go.
And so it's beautiful.
First and let me put it in the chat for y'all too. So we have shared chat on so that everyone can see each other's chats.
Yeah, this is awesome.
This is super cool. So there is the takeaway message. So first birth of an animal from an extinct subspecies by cloning, and they actually
okay.
This kind of gets at what if y'all think of what is a species or not, because in this study too, it was you took the genetic information from thawed fibroblasts. So what that means is you actually had the cells of the extinct animal, right? You took out the genetic information and you put it into the embryo of a domestic goat. And so everything is actually the same except for the mitochondria. The mitochondrial is still from your domestic goat, and that we can get into a whole discussion of does that make it the same species or not. But it was the last living specimen of this animal went extinct in 2000. They cryopreserved it in 99. They implanted it into a goat oocyte, and then it was born, and it was totally fine, although it did end up dying very quickly after, and that was due to physical defects in the lungs and a couple of other organs. And so
gotcha. So it was born alive, but it only lasted a few hours, right?
Yeah, and it was the suspicion of that is because and this wasn't known at the time because the cloning process actually, I think it was like in very early 2000 versus the paper was it looks like it was 09. And actually, I'm surprised at the journal where it is because it's such a niche journal. I would have remembered it would have been like a better higher end journal for it.
Yeah, theriogenology. I've never heard of this before. Is that like mammal genomes? Is that the idea?
Yeah,
because theria, that's a prefix that we often use for mammals. So like brontothere, calicothere. There means beast in either Latin or Greek. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is like about mammal genomics specifically.
I'm like,
but that's a guess. Again,
I'd half guess it's an MDPI predatory journal that I would think it's from.
Yeah. Oh, really?
But it took a long time, and what we didn't know at that time of making this is that the epigenome structures change over time. So the 3D structure of the chromatin is gonna be fundamentally different, and it's gonna from this process than what it was in the actual animal. And that's Lita actually popped her head in on the Dire Wolf article for a second too, is that it doesn't matter actually how close DNA sequence that you have. You need the gene expression to be similar between the two. And if they are not similar, that's due to the differences in the epigenetic state. So the 3D structure of the chromatin is going to be different because you need to have that information to kind of programmed in. And it looks like the cells that they took for these animals were de-differentiated into stem cell state, meaning you've erased kind of those marks that give it the 3D structure. So the extra information stored in the 3D structure that tells the DNA this gene's going to be on, this is going to be off, wasn't there. And so then it's, I guess, not a surprise maybe that there were some like developmental issues. It does then mean that the dire wolf, right, is even more developmentally perturbed, right, or could be, because you're missing all of the epigenome stuff because you can't get it. You can't get it, right, because we don't have that.
No, that makes sense.
It's really disappointing. It's really like that's my big takeaway, unfortunately, is that we could have been focusing on, like with the media coverage, that you cloned a gene that was not in existence for 10,000 years and an animal is born
that's
with
so
that
cool,
gene.
You know?
Yeah. Same thing with the woolly mammoth mice, because actually that paper was the exact same issue, right? That paper was like, we woolly mammified this mouse. And if you look into it, I think it was like, again, like 10, 15 genes, something like that gave them a thicker coat and coat color. Again, it's cool, but the takeaway isn't that you've made a woolly mammoth mouse, it's that you've brought back a gene that has been extinct.
Yeah, which is a really cool accomplishment in and of itself. And 15 genes is actually kind of a lot, right? I think I remember reading somewhere that like a lot of these crazy differences that we see between different breeds of domestic dog, like from like a Chihuahua to a Great Dane, different coat colors, different sizes, snout shapes, that all comes down to like a handful of genes. It's like 3 or 4 or something like that. So modifying 14 or 15 genes, that's a lot. That's impressive. And they could rest on those laurels. But that wouldn't be garnering as many headlines, I guess.
It's similar to, I know y'all have talked about it too on your stream. I think we've even talked about it on our collabs with George Church. trying to bring back the woolly mammoth.
Yeah.
And he's over at Harvard, and actually someone that y'all should look up is his wife. Tintin Wu is an incredible scientist. So she's also a professor at Harvard, and she looks at chromatin structure of flies and humans, and she invented this thing called chromatin paint, where you can mark an entirety of a chromosome and see it in 3D space. And she actually has samples that come back from space, and you get to see the differences in chromatin structure. So it's funny. Lita's always like, I actually think his wife is much cooler than George Church. But Church's argument is that he wants to make a woolly mammoth like animal with the Asian elephant by changing 50 genes. And the idea is that you're going to introduce the features of woolly mammoth and the behavior of woolly mammoth into the Asian elephant. And it's like, well, are you actually going to do that or not? And how do you test that with the gestation time, the maturity? He thinks that we need 40 animals for a breeding population to be established in Siberia. So there's all these like extra reasons of like, ooh, is this gonna work? Is this not gonna work? But even that is framed as the argument that we're gonna bring back this animal in a lot of the popular media. But at least when you talk to him, and he's actually part of this company, which is the wink wink thing that no one's saying. When you talk to him, he's very clear. We don't want to bring back the woolly mammoth. Like he's like, we want to bring in something that
facsimile.
Yeah. Versus it feels like these companies, the company press releases doesn't feel like it's kind of the same.
They're saying it is a dire wolf when it's a modified gray wolf. It's not actually a dire wolf. Yeah. And that's really important information to get across here, but it doesn't sound as exciting. So, yeah.
Do you know or have a suspicion as to what the benefit is for this kind of promotion?
I don't. Well, for the promotion, or I thought you were going to ask about the benefit to, ecology to bring back dire wolves, which I don't think we even really understand what they were doing in that Pleistocene ecosystem. Like, what was their role? What are they eating? I don't know if we have a good understanding of that. Sorry, could you ask the question?
No. Well, I mean, that was going to be a follow-up too, but just as like we were hypothesizing, maybe it's like for potential investors, like of why say.
That they're trying to hype this all up. Yeah, I'm sure it is, because I think most of their funding comes from venture capital.
Yep. It's not government funding.
So it's like a tech startup essentially, and so they've got to have really flashy press releases, and they're not trying to appeal to scientists. They're trying to appeal to like Silicon Valley investors and people like that. So yeah, it makes sense. And like I was talking about this earlier on my stream, even as scientists, we do have to kind of walk a tightrope sometimes in promoting our work, where we're trying to make it exciting and interesting for people, but also, you get too enthusiastic about things, and other scientists kind of look at you askance, and they go like, well, you're making some big claims here. That's something that we all have to deal with as scientists.
Yeah.
But this is kind of it's on another level,
It's definitely
there's a lot of hype around this.
It's even a tightrope after it's been peer reviewed is what I've seen in the past in our experience. Like even if you have all the evidence in the world, it's like you don't want to go overboard. And I don't know, like it seems too unfortunate to me, because again, like highlighting that you've brought back a gene, and even like showing us what that gene does. Like this is a gene from a dire wolf, and if we put it into a gray wolf, we get this. So it's like we then know what this 10,000-year-old gene was doing from an animal that diverged 6 million years ago. Yeah, right?
Yeah, and I don't know, I feel like a lot of you and me and a lot of other scientists would be much more amenable to hearing about this if that's what they led with, if that was the idea that they were communicating to the public. But because that is legitimately really cool. All this other stuff is, I don't know, there's so much hype here, and it's cool to have people excited about science in the general public, but if you're misleading them on any level, that could be really harmful. And we'll see how this plays out, I guess,
I can imagine that being a backlash too, of like, wait a minute, I thought you said that we have this animal, or this is the same company that wants to do the thylacine, the dodo, amongst others. Why are we like, why isn't that done yet? Why are you having difficulty with that? You just did this wolf, right? Like, and these are, I think that's a fair question, but if you actually like take a step back and just talk about how difficult this technology is, and then also like break down the headline a little, where those 15 genes that are those edits, there's 20 genetic changes in the 14 genes. 5 of those genes are actually in the coat color gene of a gray wolf, right? So if you actually break down that number, it's even less. And so
Yeah, okay.
it's those changes are there, but five of the 14 were from the gray wolf, not from the de-extinctified animal. So it's just it's unfortunate,
9, basically. Yeah.
And it's
And
not
I
that
don't know.
9 isn't
I
cool.
also,
No, it's just not sufficient,
but
I
it's
feel.
fewer than 14.
Yeah.
Their choice of direwolf as a study organism too, or as a critter to work on, is kind of baffling to me. Now that I know that it's a big thing in popular culture and will get people excited, it kind of makes sense. But when we think about bringing back Pleistocene megafauna, direwolf is never at the top of the list. It's probably not a keystone species. It's not like like bringing back the mammoth or something like that, or even bringing back American camels. That's like an organism that used to be, camels first evolved in North America, and they were a key part of the ecosystem. They were really widespread, very successful here, and they went extinct about 10,000 years ago or so, maybe due to human overhunting. We're not sure yet. But like, people aren't going to be as excited about camels, but ecologically, that might be a better place to start. Because with direwolves, I don't think we have a really good sense for their ecology, how they're actually different from gray wolves and what they're eating, what kind of a niche they're filling in that ecosystem. So again, like, the choice of that organism just feels a little like they're doing it for show rather than for reasons that are more scientifically defensible.
Honestly, for show, if I got to pick with anything, I'd go with the dodo. Because I feel like that's still popular media, right?
And it's such a clear-cut case too of like, here's a creature that had existed on the island of Mauritius for like 5+ million years. They were doing their thing for a long time, and then people show up and they're gone within less than a century. Like, that is absolutely 100% our fault. Those species, like dodos, had lived there for millions of years and weathered all kinds of different changes, climate changes, crazy storms, all kinds of upheavals like that. And then we show up and they're gone in like 80 years. So if we could atone for the sins of our fathers in that way, by bringing dodos back, like, everybody would be in favor of that, you would think. But
I know one reason they don't.
It's much more difficult, though.
That's the thing, right? Is that there has been no real successful genetic modification of an egg. Even nobody can clone them yet. Yeah, the de-dinification, right, of the chicken back to like that dinosaur-like state.
The Dino Chicken Project, yeah.
There's still, right? Yeah. There's all this, like, there's issues during development.
Well, yeah. Well, and that's also just modifying chicken eggs. It's not, in order to bring back the dodo, they would need to have a surrogate parent. You need to insert genes into a bird egg. And nobody's been able to do that before. Nobody's been able to clone a bird because the egg is just too big. And I think the embryo starts off way too small in relation to the egg size. Yep. Much tougher than it is in mammals. That's my understanding, at least. And so, I don't know. Everybody's rooting for for them to do the dodo, and to resurrect that creature, to take a Nicobar pigeon, I think, and modify it, basically turn it into something superficially resembling a dodo. That would be incredible, but it's really tough. Like, a wolf is low-hanging fruit compared to that.
The other thing, too, is if you, again, the cynic in me has difficulty on this, but if you believe the motive, for George Church, one thing that he's promoting that will be learned from this is how to make an ex vivo uterus. So basically how to make just like that uterine womb. Yeah, the artificial womb for whatever animal you're trying to clone. And then he also makes the translational claim to humans as well. And that would be the modern medical take of, if you have these high-risk pregnancies, then you could grow in this external womb. You can see the development and make sure that everything goes well. You don't put mother at risk. You don't put baby at risk because they're under monitor. And this is leading to that technology. If the cynic in you isn't, so that's just a throwaway sentence, right? And that's kind of where I struggle on it, because it almost seems like a little bit of a pie in the sky kind of statement to say at this stage.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's so far off too. It's like there's so many steps in between what they're doing now and being able to achieve that. I think it's important to have lofty goals, but yeah, I don't know. Where do you draw that line in between trying to get people really excited about some far off goal that might not be achievable and just sticking to the science? And here's what we do. We've got 9 genes that we inserted into a gray wolf, like we were talking about. Where do you draw that line? What's the balance that you strike between, way overhyping and kind of underselling? Because I know underselling is the instinct of people like us oftentimes. That's how we're trained. as scientists to be conservative like that, you know?
I mean, I think this cloning that we talked about, the previous paper, was probably undersold, right? Because you did bring back something that died out, and then, you know, asking what that dying out's impact is if we bring it back. I think that could be like the really, that was probably undersold, especially if it's just, I mean, no knock on this journal, I've never heard of it. I think you're right. The overselling is definitely where we are currently, because I still feel it could be very cool if done in the appropriate way in terms of like where we are and maybe what the end goal is in the mission of what this company wants to do. But yeah, it's just like, again, it's kind of disappointing seeing this cover of Time magazine, right? Even the way they're saying it, the first to extinct in over 10,000 years. Endangered species could be changed forever.
Yeah. That's a big claim. It's a big claim. And we were talking about this earlier on my stream, that these technologies, these methods might hold a lot of promise for helping endangered species, but you never want it to turn into a situation where people use this as an excuse to not protect habitats that are around already, not protect species that are already around. The idea that like, well, you know, we could always just bring them back from extinction if we happen to kill off all of them. Like you never want that to be the line of reasoning there. And it's really important to guard against that.
Yeah, I mean the human implications are quite wild, actually, right? To think about like what's gonna be the mindset, and that's a very, very dangerous one, right? Like, oh, we don't need to worry about taking care of species anymore because we could just de-extinctify them and it's fine. Exactly. That's a very dangerous
an attitude that you hear a lot of here in the Bay Area, like with Silicon Valley. You hear tech people. I've heard people discussing this on the train. Like going into San Francisco, like, oh yeah, well, you know, pollution isn't that big a problem, you know, on Earth because we're just going to move all of heavy industry into space, and you know, if we mess up the Earth too bad, we can always just move to Mars. You know, people legitimately think that in some of these communities, and it's deeply frustrating. I don't know. You got to tour the Frozen Zoo at one point, right?
We haven't been able.
What was that like? And
you haven't been
there yet.
We haven't yet been in the Frozen Zoo itself, but we've communicated with the staff there. We're hoping to do a tour maybe the next TwitchCon. They just, you know, we contact us next time you're kind of here, and we'll do it behind the scenes. But they did send us some photos, and it's very much just like your typical lab, where it's like lab benches and just a lot of freezers. So for those wondering, Frozen Zoo is basically a location where we store genetic information of all species that are around today. And by this could be in cell lines, like for certain cell types, it could be tissue samples. And we've actually used that to bring back species from extinction. So biggest example right now is the black-footed ferret, right? We had 20 black-footed ferrets left in the wild. They were like, do we leave them and they all die? Or do we bring them in and try to do a breeding program? And so they brought them in. 10 of them were fertile. That causes a huge inbreeding problem because there's not a lot of gene switching around. And so they actually cloned a ferret from the 70s that was alive then. It's now alive today, and so it's introducing genetic diversity. Unfortunately, she had an ovarian cyst, and she was unable to reproduce, but that's not due to the cloning process. That's actually just due to ferret biology.
Bad luck.
Yeah, that's just something with ferrets. But they're trying to do that with the northern white rhino now, and that, I think, that still comes into question of if that's a real that species or not, because they are using a surrogate to deliver, meaning your mitochondrial genome, which is inherited from mom. They don't have just a stockpile of black-footed ferret embryos. They've got domestic ferret embryos they can implant in, or southern white rhino embryos, and then who's going to carry the animal, right? What animal is going to be the surrogate? Those are all questions of, well, is that really then the same species? Is that this like new hybrid that you've made? And that honestly comes down to your definition. We've had some guest scientists on our stream that tell us there is no such thing as a species. He's just like, it is just for humans to have nice little boxes that they can draw out.
We were just talking about that the other day on my stream. The species have often very fuzzy boundaries. It's not like a cut and dry thing. It's and then if you could absolutely bring back every detail of an extinct organism, like you've got every gene down to a T, it's I guess within the natural range of variation within that species or whatever. even if you get it to look exactly like it would have looked back before it went extinct, there's still certain things that you would not be able to bring back. Things like behaviors, things like a lot of creatures have what we call culture. You know, of like elephants that, you know, pass information down generation to generation, like where to migrate during certain times of the year, where to find water, you know, which areas to avoid, which predators to avoid. You've got like, you know, gut microbiomes and stuff like that. Like these are parts of an organism that a lot of people don't think about. Like, how is it going to be able to digest its food if it doesn't have the right kind of bacteria in its gut? That's something I always wondered about with Jurassic Park. It's like, here's these animals that haven't been around for 66 million years, and you know, all of the bacterial species that were living in their guts, those are extinct now too. And you kind of can't live if you can't eat, if you can't digest your food. I don't know. In the case of if they're to like bring back, let's, you know, create a modified Asian elephant that's got mammoth traits. Yeah, I guess that would be easy enough because mammoths and Asian elephants are pretty close relatives. They might have some of the same gut flora. Maybe that doesn't work for living up in Siberia and eating the plants and grasses that are up there. These are all issues that you got to think about. You know, biology is complex. It's not simple. It's not like building a Lego set. There's so many different things going on, and I'm sure I don't even have a full understanding of that.
I don't think we do. You, as like scientists,
as geneticists,
because you know, up until 3 years ago, it was thought fruit flies don't have this transmission of information across generations, and it turns out they do, right? So if a bug has that, you definitely believe like wolves, elephants will have these higher order complex behaviors that are passed on between generations as well. And then the epigenome, we know that involves in behavior, right? But we have don't have the epigenome. I think we can get it. I think Church is trying to do it for woolly mammoth samples because they have specimens of cells. And so what that would mean is you can look at that 3D architecture of the chromatin and try to rebuild it. But like the wolves, there's no way to do that. And so we know some behaviors are genetically there. Some behaviors are epigenetically encoded, and other behaviors are learned from parent to offspring. I don't know how you're going to account for that. And that's the biggest thing, right, with George Church saying like, oh, we're going to clone the woolly mammoth and have them stomp down the permafrost, is how do you... I don't even know how you predict that, because we don't know genes in elephants that dictate their own behaviors that are around today, right?
Right. Interesting. So there's like a lot of really basic scientific research that has to take place before we can reach for the really shiny, pretty thing. Much more difficult.
And honestly, like
you got to do that.
Where do the ethics come in, right? Like, is it ethical to work on an endangered animal like an elephant and figuring out, like, if I take out this gene, what changes? Independent of time and money, is it ethical to work on an animal that's endangered to the point an elephant is? And presumably the perception of the world that an elephant has, right? That hits an ethical point too.
I mean, these creatures have rich emotional and social lives. Yeah. Like they're extraordinarily deep emotions in an animal like an elephant. And we kind of barely understand that. And it's so in some ways it's kind of one of the worst animals maybe to be doing work like this on. Elephants and maybe whales are like, they're extraordinarily intelligent, thoughtful creatures. But yeah, and I'm not trying to get the idea across that I'm absolutely against the very idea of this project. Like, I think it's really cool, and I wish them all the best of luck. But it's going to be extraordinarily difficult, and I feel like that idea is not getting across to the general public with stuff like this, like with Time Magazine here. No longer extinct. Dire wolves. They're back. They're not. They're not. It's going to be so much more difficult than that. Oh boy.
I think, to be clear, you and I would not be talking about this if this wasn't interesting.
No,
right?
Absolutely.
So it's not that we're poo-pooing the research. Like, to be clear to chat, like, it is not that it's not exciting. It's not that it's not cool. It's not that it doesn't have far-reaching implications for both an ethical side of things, for a technology side of things, for an environmental, all of it, right? All of it's really cool. It's just, it feels more like a used car salesman presenting it to us rather than a scientist to me. And that's, I think, important because, right, we already have so much mistrust in science. If someone picks this up and then it comes out, well, you know, in like a couple of days, well, you know, just kidding, it's only a couple of genes. Like, you could be undoing a lot of work that's being done by a lot of people to re-entrust in science only to have it be taken away. And no one's going to be like, well, this was a company, they've got an agenda. You're not going to look at those nuances. I know I wouldn't if I was, unless I was in the trenches. Yeah.
They're not going to make those distinctions. Yeah.
And nor should they.
You're totally right about that. And people don't have time for that for the most part. That's why we do what we do. We're trying to communicate complex subjects to a general audience and try and get people excited and informed. And sometimes this makes our job a little bit more difficult. If you were to, let's say you were in charge of this, Balint, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much. How would you go about this project here? How would you announce this to the public? Say you and Lita were able to pull this off in your garage, like a home laboratory, and you're going to present it here on Twitch. How would you do that?
I think
what would you lead with?
Personally, the approach overall needs to be changed from this company, in my mind. Mm-hmm. So instead of just these one big splashy announcements, they need to have an active series of announcements coming out of just explaining the fundamentals of what's going on. Because if my dream would be to be able to say, hey, we brought back a gene or a cluster of genes that were from 10,000 years ago that were last seen on Earth. Mm-hmm. But the only way to have folks understand that and be accessible is you have to define what a gene is, right? You have to define why genes go extinct. All these fundamentals and the groundwork needs to be laid, and they just don't do that, right? And so at the end of the day, my dream announcement of, hey, we brought back genetics from an animal that's been extinct for 10,000 years, the implication of that's going to be lost because you're not putting in the legwork. You're putting in the sensationalized news piece to be able to get a bunch of money, like from the next group. And yeah, you can go talk to Joe Rogan and tell him this same thing. But I've watched the Joe Rogan interviews, and he does not ask these questions. It's very much like, oh, you brought back a wolf, and then that's what's being clicked on, and it's just being led in the wrong direction, I feel. And so, I'm pretty sure Lita and I would both, number one, we're not ready to do this publication because I want to see the data. I think even if you're going and patenting these things, you need to show off what is the science behind what you did, what's the genetics behind it, what does that mean, how to interpret it, like very fundamentally lay it out. Like this is for the popular media, and then here we have the science as well. I think that would be very critical to be able to do. I get it's a company. I get they got to make their money, so you can't give away everything, but you can get enough away to ensure that this is like above board, right? Like what's the failure rate of the gene? How many embryos did we go through? What worked? What didn't? Like, right? Is it that it's 3 wolves out of 30, 300? Like we don't even have these metrics, right? And so that I think also makes me cautious of how excited we should be.
Well said. I'm so glad we were able to talk about this and to get your perspective on it, Balint, because I've been wondering all day what you think about this. And I don't have to wonder. This is so cool that we could just talk about it.
I really like the drop-in feature. I think we should just use it more. We should just like knock on each other, be like, "Hey, what do you think of this paper?" Because that's the cool part is like bridging communities and just like expanding on the fact that we, even if we're in agreement on a topic, you and I have very different thoughts about just because of our training, right, of our expertise and like what even defines a species. Like that. That's going to be fundamentally different from a paleontological perspective versus a geneticist perspective versus anyone else's perspective too. And so it's really, really exciting to be able to note these differences and be able to talk about it and just bring it more to top of mind too.
Do more of these. I'm excited about that idea, Balint. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Right back at you, my friend. We'll see you soon, Danny. Thank you.
See you later. Bye, Balint.